Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Dana Wohl, and I'm the Associate Director for Customer Success at Jove. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar discussing hybrid learning environments and their impact on faculty and students. Today's conversation, Hybrid Classrooms, Tackling a New Normal Post-2020, focuses on the challenges and opportunities that have arisen for educators over the past year. Before we proceed, I'd like to get a few housekeeping items out of the way. Can everyone please use the raise hand icon on their toolbox to let me know that you can hear me? Okay, great. Excellent, thank you. If you have any questions for our panelists at any point, please ask them in the Q&A section of your toolbox. We will hold all questions until the end for a general Q&A session. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you within the next 24 hours. And at the conclusion of the session, we will be sending out a brief 5-item questionnaire. We appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve our webinars and live discussions. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-panelists, Dr. Johnny Alradi, instructor at the Department of Cell, Micro, and Molecular Biology at the University of South Florida, and Dr. Megan Porter, lecturer in the Department of Chemistry at Indiana University, Bloomington. Thank you for joining us, Johnny and Megan. Now, to get things started, I'd like you both to please briefly introduce yourselves, tell us how long you've been teaching, the courses you teach, and their style of delivery. Megan, let's start with you.
Hi, I've been teaching for IU since 2015. I teach primarily upper level courses in inorganic chemistry, so both lectures and labs. And they range, the lectures around 200 students and the lab can be around 100 to 120. And then I have a specialty upper level lab that's about 16. So that's kind of a odd duck for our university. Currently, usually they are all face-to-face and had never had any online component. Currently, the lecture is completely online, but has asynchronous and synchronous components. And then the lab, because of restrictions, we can't have everyone in the lab at all times. And so we're running it. We have 3 experiments running every single week, 2 of which are virtual and 1 of which is face-to-face. So it's been a little bit of a transition.
Thank you, Megan. How about you, Johnny?
Yes, hi guys, from sunny Tampa. I know it's a little bit cold some other places. I'm an instructor at CMMB at the University of South Florida in the Tampa campus. And my training is in molecular biology. The courses that I teach are primarily microbiology, genetics, including some upper level courses. And then over the last year, I had the pleasure of working on a couple of task forces that helped transition our labs to online modalities. I also coordinated the microbiology lab this past semester. So we used a lot of tools to help us transition. I've been teaching for a few years now. In fact, I joke with my students, all of them were born after I started teaching. So I've been teaching since fall of '97. And I'm one of those like high school teachers where I'm teaching now 2nd generation students, which is really exciting. And on a final note, I'm not an expert on hybrid classrooms, but I did stay at the Holiday Inn Express last night. So just wanted to get that out of the way.
That's helpful to know. And we're going to be talking a lot more about all of that. So we have a really good conversation coming up. So thank you again, both for joining us and sharing a little bit about the classes you teach and your background. So Johnny, it sounds like over the last year, a lot of adjustments had to have been made in how you administer your pedagogy with the transition amidst the pandemic as our backdrop. Tell us a little bit about some of those adjustments that you had to make.
Yeah, Dana, that was a very tough one, I think, for everyone. So, and it's amazing that we're now a year into it. I mean, we went online in middle of March, was right around our spring break. So almost exactly 1 year. And I think, we went through several phases. The first phase was in spring of 2020. It was almost like, the most important thing is caring for your safety and the safety of your students. So we had to adapt our syllabi to make sure that, they can take care of their families, and then they're socially distant and take care of their own well-being. So we struggled mightily in spring, but we quickly realized that this is not just going to be a 2-week, 3-week hiatus. We knew that it was going to be summer, indeed, probably fall, that we will still be online. So in our at our school, we had at least some of the higher administration were very, very helpful in realizing right away that there are limited number of resources and there are many stakeholders. So we quickly formed the task force, and I had the pleasure of leading it for the College of Arts and Sciences. So we had chemists, we had physicists, we had biology, we had so several other departments, and then we brought in the library, we brought in IT, and then the College of Innovative Education. So this task force, we were able to secure a lot of platforms that helped us navigate the very end of the spring, but more importantly, the summer and then the fall. And now I think, we are at a point where we can start thinking about and I know we're going to talk about that a lot, talking about the post-COVID environment. So I think we were able to navigate another thing that, we did was we filmed TAs in the lab doing the experiment. That way, students can benefit from that at different stages. So I think we rose to the task, and I think more importantly, I think credit also goes to the students themselves, because they had to deal with all sorts of life and personal and pedagogic university situations, but we managed.
So I wanted to follow up on the adjustments for students. I mean, students, first of all, for our audience, I'm only going to say this once, I promise. The past 12 months have been unprecedented, of course, with respect to faculty and students. Megan, students come to college full of expectations of what their experience is going to be like, paved by many years of brothers, sisters, and friends going before them. What was it like for students? How did the changes in content delivery affect them amidst everything else going on?
I think there were a number of ways they were affected, and for both incoming, never been to college, and even for students who have been to college for years. Even for those that I teach primarily juniors and seniors, they had an idea of how they learned. They had routines, how they studied. They had support networks they would spend that time with, especially as they get into upper level classes. And all of a sudden that was taken away. So in a lot of ways, it became much more isolating. I had students who were studying, living, and eating in their dorm room. Like that was their entire life for their semester. And I think you go from that community. A lot of us looked at it from the aspect of what am I doing in my classroom, but a student, their life is on campus, right? Their life is that community, and that they didn't have that. And then in the classroom, I think a lot shifted onto the students, in ways we don't think about. If I'm teaching and I see my students 3 days a week, I come in on Monday, it's really easy for me to say, hey, we have a quiz on Wednesday. Don't forget, you have this coming up next week, plan ahead. You want to allocate some time here. But now if you shift online, or even partly online, where you're not having as much interaction with them, you don't want to be sending announcements every day, because then they can get overwhelmed and get lost in the email. We're not their only course. But at the same time, that means even in the world's best, we use Canvas, best organized Canvas site, a lot more is on the students to know where to go to find resources, keep track of what they have coming up, try to allocate that time. Where a lot of us are guilty of living by the syllabus, right? What is due this week? And so many times that can get you into trouble because you have it due on Monday and you didn't look until Sunday night. And we used to be able to help with that. And now a lot more of that's on the students. And I think that's been a challenge for them. But also just if you thought you learned a certain way and that's not an option anymore, or online test taking, there's so much that they had to adapt to. And I agree with Donnie, they've done a great job.
Right. Lots of changes and adaptations. Johnny, how about your experience with students? How what can you share with us about what your experience?
Yeah, just to echo what Megan said, I mean, this was a total disruption, right? You're used to going to campus, a routine, and then suddenly this whole thing was disrupted. And then one problem with online, teaching and learning is that, the equity aspect of it. So there were, now suddenly a student went from the dorm back to home. They were sharing, maybe a laptop with many other family members. There was no place to, to isolate, to study, to focus. So we, and I know many universities also had another thing was they relied on the library for their, laptop, for their printing, and now suddenly, that was not available to them anymore. So at USF, and I'm sure at many other universities worldwide, there were a loaner program. So, students can come to campus and then, loan a laptop, borrow a laptop till the end of the semester. So that was a big challenge, I think. So I, for one, and I know many others, went to asynchronous lectures. That way a student can, manage their time better, and then they can, watch the lecture at their own leisure. But I think, this is one big aspect of it. I do a lot of group work, and it's different to have a group work online than meeting at the library, meeting with your professor after class, meeting with with your instructor for lunch at our student union, which is the Marshall Center. So, but again, credit to them. For the most part, they persevered, and I think we're better for it. We have learned, we have adapted, and I think there's a lot of good things that we can carry going forward.
Absolutely. As everyone on this call is aware, college is obviously a time of immense adjustment, particularly when it comes to the time management. When you fully go remote, this whole onus of responsibility to kind of follow up on what you were saying, Megan, really falls on the shoulders of the students to effectively time manage and kind of look ahead whether the course is going to be synchronous or asynchronous, what to anticipate coming forward. I kind of want to build on this asynchronous versus synchronous notion. So you both taught in both types of formats. Megan, what is your opinion on running an asynchronous versus a synchronous class?
I think there's a lot of aspects you have to consider with it. I think, at least in the spring, my students liked the idea of asynchronous as an idea, and then they realized how much more it was on them and missed that interaction, both with me and each other. But for example, my lecture is 200 students. So even if I got all of them on Zoom, so equity issues aside, scheduling aside, time zones aside, I can't effectively help 200 people on Zoom at the same time anyway. And like Johnny said, I do a lot of group work. So I kind of decided to split the difference. All my lecture content is asynchronous. And they watch, I have it due twice a week. They have 3 or 4 days to do it. We have a built-in system to Canvas, and it's low stakes questions based on it. I write them, they can take it as many times as they want. Just that idea of did you do it, a little bit of accountability. And then instead of having them come on Zoom 3 days a week for all 200, I break them into 3 groups. So they come once a week instead, and and then they also have a recitation. So they come twice a week, and the entire time is spent working through problems. We get them in groups of 5, so we use Zoom breakout rooms heavily. And then I am lucky enough, I only have 1 graduate teaching assistant, but I have a lot of undergrads that I've recruited that do it for free. So they're not getting paid. I have 23 of them. And so I have enough that for every 2 groups, I have 1 dedicated undergraduate that is cycling between those 2 Zoom rooms to provide support. And then I cycle through all of them to get to know the students. And we use Jamboards. It's a Google aspect for that, but I can in real time see them drawing structures. Since I'm chemistry, we have a lot of drawings as opposed to a Google Doc typing. It's the same idea though, but I can in real time see what each group is doing, catch those misconceptions. But students have really liked even just that touch point, the getting to see us, getting face to face. That's been a huge part. So my lab, I have to do much more asynchronously because we have 3 experiments going on every time. And so in that case, they're only coming into lab once every 3 weeks based on our capacities. And what I try to do is pop in and say hi during that lab time to, again, at least give that face-to-face interaction. But just based on having 3 experiments going, that one's a lot harder to do anything synchronously. But I do think when you can do small aspects of that, at least, that students have really appreciated that.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a little bit about the generation gap between us and our students. Johnny, you had alluded to that initially. That's something I definitely want to focus on. I mean, all of the changes that are taking place socioculturally, technologically, there's a bit of keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to presenting content to students in a way that is appetizing for them. One could argue that this generation of students grew up with a tablet in their hand, and this is how they like to consume their media. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dana. It's hard, and I mean, I see as one of the few professions where you're getting older, and then your clients are always the same age, right? So when I started teaching, I would tell jokes, for example, about President Clinton or something. But then while they were very good biologically speaking, they're obviously no one will know what you're talking about. But I think at its heart, it's the same. You want them, to learn. You want them to be lifelong learners. So that aspect of it hasn't changed. And I will say this: the attention span has certainly changed. Where you could lecture now, you used to for 60 minutes, and then everyone was, in rapt attention. Now the way I see it is that you could be a combination of, I don't know, Taylor Swift. Dave Chappelle and George Clooney, and you're still gonna lose them after 20 minutes. So doing your lecture in small increments, so 20 minutes and then an activity, 20 minutes and then an activity. So that's one aspect of it, and I think they realize that, and they will work with you. I mean, they know. I mean, I'm talking about students in general. So while it has been hard, I think but ultimately, the mission and the message is the same. Get them involved in the lecture, and you just try to do it in different ways. Bring in more videos, and then more newspaper headlines and things like that. But ultimately, while it has been a challenge, it's a welcome challenge, I think, for all of us who are in this mission of education. So.
Yeah, I would add to that, sometimes, and I admit I'm guilty of it, we give students these days a bad rep, right? Like they won't go to the textbook to look for something, they go online. But in reality, you kind of have to ask yourself, does it matter if they're searching for the answer in a textbook, or if they're willing to go watch a video on it, they're still willing to at least go out and do something. Now, I will say one of the issues has come for me is that idea of trying to curate what they're seeing, right? Just because they go see a YouTube video on the same topic, it might not be at the same level. They might not explain it the same way. You don't even know if it's really accurate. And so being able to kind of help funnel those resources through my Canvas site, providing those to students. It's not that I found that they won't go out and do some of that extra learning, but it's nice if it can go kind of a streamlined. And that is one thing that I will say, online or face-to-face, I did a lot of video additional resources, even face-to-face. It takes a lot of time to do. And so I have definitely learned to depend, I have certain learning resources that I will go to for those videos first, and that I know they have good inorganic ones, things like that. But I think they're still willing to go look at them. It's just a different type, as opposed to, we may have been much more likely to go to our textbook. And I think in my class, I got rid of a textbook more on the financial issues, because our books averaged around $200 for one semester. And that is a lot to ask for a student when most of my students aren't going on to chemistry grad school. And so then you've taken away what we consider a traditional resource. And I think what we're doing is seeing that gap being filled by more interactive or engaging media than reading a chapter.
And then if I may, Dana, echo what Megan, and then elaborate a little bit on it. And I think there's so much information out there right now, right? So that, if you're an educator, you don't have to create things from scratch. Mm-hmm. As long as you serve as a curator. And I see, frankly, this is my job or this is one big aspect of our jobs, is to curate content. Even if it's a short, like 2-minute thing from the news, or, from this website, or, dare I say, Wikipedia. And, there's so much content that you could use. You could put it on Canvas or some other, learning management system. And then students, nowadays they have so many different, I guess, challenges to their time, right? They're taking 5 courses. They may have to be dealing with, some family members. They have to work to make ends meet. So if we can make it a little bit easier for them, here's, 5 short videos, watch them. You can really learn about mitosis or meiosis, things like that. And I think, this goes a long way towards, making, the learning much easier and frankly, more fun.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the remote transition. Certainly, we've had to utilize a lot of teaching tools over the past year that we haven't had to use to the extent that we have over the previous 12 months. So, Megan, starting with you, what were some of the tools that you utilized when you started putting together your courses post the transition?
Yeah, so I will say I was really lucky. I've always used a lot of technology in my courses. So at least a bit of that learning curve was not, I didn't have to do it on the fly. So one of the things is I didn't have a choice in the way either of my classes were run. My class is 200, it was going to be fully online. There wasn't an option. And my lab, because of restrictions, it was going to be a mix, not an option. What I learned very quickly is that I teach the wrong area of chemistry. I teach an upper level. It is not required by a lot of other majors. And so I saw my colleagues like organic and gen chem. There are home lab kits available. There are full online homework learning systems that usually are tied to textbooks, which I didn't have. And I teach a much more like specific area of chemistry. And so those resources weren't available. We don't tend to have as large of enrollments as the others. So they're not going to be your big like money market area. And so that was a huge challenge for me, was saying, okay, I have very specialized, especially in the lab techniques. And yeah, we could go in and film them, but one was a time. So to be honest, I have 2 young kids. We're in our 3rd straight snow day at home, so they are upstairs. So it was a time aspect of still trying to balance putting everything else online and filming these videos and dealing with my family, who also, we didn't have childcare. And so I needed a way to save time as well. And so I will say, on here, one of the big resources I used was Joke. I actually started using it. I looked into that as well. I started using it before we were forced online. They had a free trial earlier in the semester and I just started it, but they have specialized for like inorganic, analytical, some chemistry topics that you don't tend to find in a lot of other areas. And 70% of my students aren't chemistry majors. So one of the things I really liked about the videos were they always tie it to what you can use it for, not just like, here's a lab, but what you can use it for. So for me, there was a suite of professionally done videos, questions already there if I needed question banks in techniques. So that was huge for me. And then I also use a lot of the other technology. Mainly I use, it's a free program called Doceri, but it's on an iPad or a Surface Pro, but it allows me to annotate. So as I am recording lectures now, I can annotate my slides. My students can see what I'm writing. And then as I mentioned before, I heavily rely on Google Jamboards for real-time interaction between students. And then, my students I've actually found are amazing at finding me resources. So when it comes to that idea of curating, a lot of times my students, I found this video, and we have a class-wide messaging system through our LMS. And they're like, I found this video, hope it helps people. And it's great because they found it. And now I have it for the next semesters, right? I don't have to go find it. And so I've really heavily invested my students in getting involved in finding some of those technologies because they search sites that I wouldn't even think of searching.
Sure. Now, Johnny, with particular respect to hybrid setup classrooms, what tools have helped you reach the objectives of your students?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the hybrid aspect, the way it is defined, is the most difficult to carry out. And that's, I think, across, I'm on a task force for the state of Florida also. And then this is a sentiment that's shared by most colleagues. the idea of having some students in class or in the lab while others are at the same time at home. So the challenge is basically keeping everyone on task. So faculty and TAs find it hard to navigate the technology, right? So where should I be standing best to make sure that these guys are, hearing me well, and I'm also interact with the other guys. When we do group activities, right, we found out that the best way is to do the group activity so in other words, you can't do a group activity where someone is in class or in the lab and someone at the same time is in the same group elsewhere. So online. So we have to do it for them alone and then for us alone, even though it's the same activity. But that way, they can engage with each other better. So frankly, this has been the hardest one to carry out because we've also found out that students realize that they don't really have to be in class. They can get the same quote unquote information by being online. So while you start out, let's say the lecture with 30-30, by the time, week 2 rolls around, you're left with you and then, your best fan and everyone else is quickly going online. So this has been the hardest. So we, and at USF, most of us are now gravitating towards either completely, this modality or completely the other modality, because we found out that, trying to navigate this milieu, this medium is very difficult. And if I may go back to just one other aspect of synchronous versus asynchronous, I think many of us in the spring opted for asynchronous because of the complete disruption of our schedule. But in the summer and in the fall, many of us went towards synchronous. I know I did go from asynchronous to synchronous for this simple reason. I felt that our students wanted a sense of normalcy, right? So that you have from 9:30 to 10:45 general genetics, from 11 to 12:15 microbiology, organic chemistry, whatever. Labs also, I think a lab that is done synchronously is much better than asynchronously, given obviously all things being equal, because you could have them all together at the same time. It's only 20 students. You start out, and if I may also go back to what Megan said, a platform that we used was indeed Joe, because the videos are very short. They're about 10 minutes each. You can assign them in class, you can assign them out of class. But whatever platform you use, I think the engaging aspect of it would be best. And, I think many of these, will stay with us long after, this ordeal is over, God willing.
Certainly a lot to learn in a short amount of time. Big adjustment for you and your students. Did you feel that you were provided adequate training and infrastructure from your institution to help bridge this gap?
Yeah, is it for me?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, okay. Well, the short answer is yes. I feel very proud. I feel very lucky to work at USF. We have a very good support system. We have a College of Innovative Education that put their money where their mouth is. They allowed us to secure platforms. We have instructional learning designers that were able to assist us to make our Canvas courses more student friendly, where the learning outcomes are easily spelled out. More importantly, I think we have a network of like-minded faculty that help each other out. So we have weekly sessions where faculty who are starting something or have problems with it. It's basically an open lab where you can solve these problems. But I think most importantly is that there's a support network for students. Whether it's loaning laptops, whether it's telling them how to download things, how to navigate Microsoft Teams, how to complete assignments on time, and working with them to ensure that they do finish time. And one final point about the adjustment, and I think many students took advantage, and then many universities, is the idea of a pass-fail. So we realized that students were struggling early on. So we did not want to give them, the pressure of, performing to an ABCD, F scale. They can opt for a satisfactory, unsatisfactory. So that's just one way to alleviate the pressure.
Absolutely. Now, kind of want to focus our vision forward here. So, we talked a little bit about this the other day, the chalkboard era of learning. Prior to COVID, we'd attend lecture, faculty member would give their lecture, and that was the routine. And then the past 12 months happened and everything got flipped on its head. My question for you, Megan, is there any going back? What does this all look like 2022, 2023, the mix of traditional lecture style pedagogy and all of these wonderful tools that are available to us now?
I mean, I think I'll start with the good thing is as much as I will admit I've complained and worked way too hard in this past year, time-wise, I've not work-life balance. I am glad to say I don't think it's all in vain. I don't think when we go back that I'm not going to use any of the skills that I picked up this year. And ideally, I should say, I don't think there's going back to the professor walks in, writes for 50 minutes and walks out. And I don't think it's the method of instruction as far as like chalkboard versus PowerPoint slides versus, I don't think that's as big of a difference. I think that depends a little bit more on your class. With 200 students, I'm not writing on a chalkboard, but with 10, why make PowerPoint slides? You can write on a chalkboard, but I think it's more what we do with our time. So I don't think you're going to get, ideally, we're not going back to this 50-minute talk, students leave, but even in our teaching, that you're doing, as Johnny pointed out, shorter increments, and then get the students working on a problem, getting them engaged, keeping them working with each other, that idea of more group work. And I think we were seeing a big shift to that even before we went online. I think one of the nice parts is online has exposed us to some of the tools that we can use in our classrooms. So a lot of, I've seen some of it in the chat, Kahoot, Menti, they're all these polling softwares, right? We have this real-time feedback for our students so that we can tailor the content in the class. And when I say tailor, I don't mean that we're going to drop our expectations to get everyone to have an A. I mean, if my expectations are here and I know what they're struggling with in real time, I can adjust what I'm doing in real time to get them up to those expectations. So we're not dropping it. We're just working to get people to those expectations that we have. I also think a big thing is that most of us experience was it didn't work well when we tried to just shift, this is what I do in face-to-face to online, right? I think a lot of us needed to start at the beginning. I know I did. I really went through my learning goals and said, what do I want a student to get out of this course, both from my course discipline, but also for the courses they're going on to next, what they want to do after that, and really take that time to say, what skills do my students need? What do I want them to learn? As opposed to, I've always had this time, so I'm just going to teach all this, or I've always just thrown this in, but really looked at our courses. And I'm hoping that when people go back face-to-face, we take that same approach. You start with those learning goals and not just, oh, I can go back to what I was doing, but where did my students struggle? What got them more engaged? And I think that is what we're going to be able to take forward from this. So you might go back to a chalkboard, which is fine, but I think that sage on the stage, right, is the classic phrase. I'm hoping that's not what people go back to, because we have learned a lot from this.
Absolutely. Where do you stand, Johnny?
Yeah, echoing, almost exactly what Megan said. I think we would be fooling ourselves if we think that, pre-COVID and then post-COVID, and then what I like to call past COVID is going to be the same. It's going to be different. There are many, other professions where they realize that, we might as well not go back to the office because, we can do everything at home. And I think in higher education, we're realizing that's not the case. Our students want to be back on campus. We want to be back on campus. I have a special position in the sense that I've been teaching online for more than a decade. And I'm teaching in many cases, I teach the same exact course, face-to-face and online, although not in the last year, clearly. But you realize that online education is not for everyone. Some students love it. If you're disciplined, if you're determined, if you can, put everything and focus, you're fine. But you're going to miss the interactions with your professor, with your TA, with your friends, more importantly, with your, classmate that's sitting next to you. We as teachers, I think, have to be able to still take advantage of the classroom environment, but we would be doing ourselves and frankly our students a disservice if we don't use a lot of these platforms that are already available. And again, to Megan's point, and I saw, some of our in the chat, they're using Kahoot, and we're using Kahoot actually for the first time. There's an app that links it to Teams. So we've got, good feedback from students, but things like this where you can, get the best of both worlds, the online and the face-to-face, and it keeps it, interesting. It keeps it, good for our students and, for our ultimate mission, which is, informing better students and better, I guess, citizens.
So to kind of push this conversation to a focal point before we start taking some Q&A, what you just said, Johnny, was actually a really good segue to this topic. So I don't think any of us could have predicted what the teaching landscape would look like when we started our careers, what it would look like today. So starting with you, Johnny, what advice would you give to someone who's starting their career or interested in starting their career to become a higher education professor, instructor?
That's a very interesting question. Honestly, I would give them, probably a couple of advices. One is and this might sound strange to most of you or probably all of you, is what my, I think, grade 1 teacher shared with us, which is a very small poem that I think, still resonates with me and I live it every day. And it's a simple, a statement. But anyway, it's about, good, better, best. I will never rest until my good is better and my better is best. I've been teaching for 25 years and this has been my mantra. I teach the same courses. It's very dull. So you have to, keep vested in this idea to lecture or to give a lab that it's as if it's your last lab. Another quick is the idea of, in fact, I started with a reference to an advertisement, and allow me, Dana, to finish with one. Some of you may have seen the commercial, The Most Interesting Man in the World, the Dos Equis. I am the self-dubbed the most interesting professor in the world. And, I finish with, this would be one advice, is that stay curious, my friend. He finishes with stay thirsty, my friend, stay curious. Because lifelong learners, I think, is an absolute requirement for you as a teacher, and more importantly for your students. I'm teaching courses, half of the material I didn't learn, but I still have only 16 weeks to cover it. So I have to basically pick and choose. I have to pique their interest to allow them to learn on their own, to be critical thinkers, because otherwise I cannot control anything. So that's probably it. Stay curious and keep doing it.
That's very nicely put. I'm going to use that myself. So
Okay.
How about you, Megan?
I would say I probably have two main pieces of advice. The first is to have fun with it. We've seen how much we have access to now that we can pull into our classes, even when we go back face to face, that get students interaction. We talked about polling software. But don't be afraid to try those new things. And with that, be open with your students. I saw people were chatting about Padlet in the chat. I love Padlet, but the first time I tried to use it, it's a free online messaging system, messaging board type thing. The whole point I was using it for were for my students to post questions for a review session ahead of time, right? So students who were too shy to speak up in class or now too slow to unmute on Zoom, they could do it anonymously and still get their questions addressed. I forgot to hit the allow students to write option on Padlet. So it was up there for a week and students couldn't actually write anything. But beforehand, I had told my students like, hey, we're going to try it out. This could work. Like if it doesn't, let me know. And no student got mad at me. Nobody was like, oh my gosh, forget it. They just were like, hey, Dr. Porter, we can't actually write anything. And it was fine. And so I've never experienced that. I'm going to try something and then my evals are lower that semester. And I think part of that is because I'm really open with my students about, hey, I'm trying this. And then I get their feedback. And I think that's a huge piece of advice is getting student feedback early and often. Most of us have course end evals, but they don't actually help the students in the course, right? They help the next set of students. Mm-hmm. So, even at the mid-semester, just a quick check-in, or after you try something new, ask the students how they felt about it. But on that same note about having so much available, resist that urge to try something just because it's there. I think you really want to frame every question, everything you do in classes. Do I think this is going to help my students learn better? And if it's not, if it's just a fancy thing, or you just love to try technology, we have to remember that every time we learn something, our students also are learning something new. So if it's not really going to make a difference, really going to benefit their learning, then why make them learn something else just for the sake of saying, hey, I use this cool new technique. So I think, being open with your students about what you're trying and why you're trying it, but also making sure before you try anything, that is always how you're framing anything you're doing is, will this help my students learn? And if it won't, then don't bother putting it in. You can be a great teacher without doing every aspect of technology that's out there. And your students are going to appreciate it if they know that what you are trying is because you really believe it's going to be beneficial to them.
Great. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences and insights. We have lots of great questions from the audience. I'm going to pick and choose, I think, some of the most juicy ones. So let's start off with you, Megan. When you give exams online, students are cheating with all the measures we're taking. How are you dealing with this?
Yeah, so I really had to also reframe my thinking in this, is that like my students cheat face-to-face too. So I think you have the students who are determined to cheat, whether they were face-to-face or online, they're going in saying I'm going to cheat. And then you have the students who wouldn't cheat face-to-face, but it's easier online. It's all of a sudden accessible. And so the way I've done it, I give both quizzes and I don't give exams, but I'll say what I do instead of an exam. But my quizzes, they get retakes. I will say this was a huge time sink last semester, so I'm just going to put that out there before I say it. My quizzes are about 10 questions. For 200 students, I wrote 20 versions per question, so that no more than 10 students had the same version. It allowed me to leave them open longer. We had a lot of PDF upload questions so we could see their work, and it had to match what was on their actual thing. So that was huge for that. The versions really helped, and the students knew it. So on some questions where I couldn't reasonably write 20 versions, there would only be one or two, but they assumed there were still 20, and we just went with that assumption. And then I was careful on the keys that I gave. I would give a how to approach the problem key. So I wasn't making a key for every single version of those 20, but they could put their numbers in or their molecule in and be able to figure out what the answer was on that. And we didn't really have any academic misconduct issues with that. I also made it very clear to students, our LMS system offers the option on a quiz. They could either see all the questions and go back and forth and do it however they want, or we can restrict it to seeing one question at a time or one question at a time and lock their answer. And I made it very clear from the beginning of the course that as soon as we had a single case of academic misconduct that we caught, we would be going to one question at a time and locking the answer. So I did use a little bit of fear there on that. For the exams, I don't use the traditional exams, they're cumulative challenges, but I write them based on literature. So it makes it a lot harder, and I do restrict that time. So I use it in a particular, everyone's taking it within this 2-hour chunk, because I can't write multiple versions on that since I'm taking it from active literature. We do use Respondus, which is a video based. Now, to be completely honest, with 200 students who are doing canned work, Respondus flags it all the time, and we don't go back to watch the videos. But the students in their mind know we have the ability to go back and watch the videos, and they have to show us their work and things like that. So it's a little bit more of the knowledge of it than us actively using it, because we're limited on that. But I've also found that if I take from literature, it's a lot harder for them to go use services like PEG and Bartleby and Course Hero and all those, because I search my questions. I have an undergrad search them before and after. And so it's very obvious if anyone's put them online. And last year, Verizon offered free accounts to Chegg, yay. But it meant faculty had them too. So I'm very honest that I have a Chegg account and I will go check online to see if the questions are on there. So I haven't had that issue. But versions are great if you're gonna leave it open longer. For something that you can't, it is nice, which I realize not everyone has. If you have a purely asynchronous class, you might not be allowed to restrict particular times. But then if you can do more of those, I love explain your reasoning, right? Because then it becomes pretty easy to see the same phrase over and over. as
Yep.
opposed to like a
That
math.
they've integrated the knowledge and can regurgitate it.
Exactly. So, and I use open notes. I'll be honest with that, because I write my exams based on literature. Having their notes isn't going to give them the answer. They still have to apply it to the problem that we're looking at. So by using open notes, I've gotten rid of that aspect of I can't tell if a student has their notes with them or not. So it was definitely a different way, but I actually think I'm going to use that when I go back face to face. I'm still going to allow them to bring their notes in and do these challenges. It's something that I'm actually going to take forward.
That's great. Now, Johnny, this question is for you. So certainly, all right, let me just read this. How do you think employers or grad programs will perceive students who have done virtual labs that may take away from the hands-on aspect of their practical work?
That's a good question, Dana. Next.
So
Actually,
I mean,
that's a very
it's a tough question
because
we want to prepare the students obviously for success in their lives, but to a degree we're dealing with notes.
Right. And then, I'm on a committee where we're also looking at, for example, graduate schools, not just employers, graduate schools, whether, a medical school or a pharmacy school would, take microbiology lab that was taken virtually. And I can tell you this, the mentality has changed. It used to be, 5 years ago that all of these virtual labs were fluff, they were easy, they're not really learning much, so it was automatically a no. Now, I know a pharmacy school doesn't really, has taken it to a level where they do accept, for the most part, that a lab or a course indeed that was taken online, because the idea that it is a fluff course and it's not rigorous, where you're not really testing critical thinking skills and then lab skills, etc., is slowly, I think, but surely going away, in the sense that employers and then graduate schools are realizing most, in fact, of the students would have learned most of the techniques. Now, is it all techniques? Is it the same if you look at a virtual microscope versus you have a microscope in the hands with you and then you can change the fine focus, etc.? Of course not. But I think the tools and then the platforms that are available are making it in such that employers and graduate schools are realizing that, wait a minute, we need to take a harder look. It's not an automatic no. Let's dig in deeper and then see exactly what they're learning. And I think slowly but surely, they will eventually come to the idea that, online doesn't mean automatically fluff. Automatically, they're not learning anything. It has been a challenge. The challenge is slowly eroding, I think. The obstacles are slowly eroding. And then hopefully we'll get to a point where, you can demonstrate that you've really learned a lot. There's no magic bullet. It's not an automatic yes, but I think we're getting there.
Absolutely. All right. This next question is for you, Megan. This is another tough one that a lot of us struggle with. So how do you accommodate the learning diversity in your hybrid classes, meaning students who master content quickly as opposed to students who move more slowly or have some sort of accommodation?
Yeah, so I try and do a lot. So like I said, my content's asynchronous. And I think that has helped, because instead of having it do 3 days a week, I have it do twice. And so they have 3 or 4 days to complete all the lecture content for that. It's usually no more than a total of 60 minutes across 3 or 4 days, obviously chunked in very small videos. And then what I've done is, in the very first slide of every video, I have practice problems. Like I said, I don't have a textbook, so they're problems I've written, but a set of practice problems specifically for that material. And what I do is I've really encouraged students to start, day 1, not day 3 when it's due. But watch one video and then do a couple problems to just gauge their comfort level with it. If they're comfortable, go on to the second video. But I think that's actually helped all students, even students that master it quickly. But my course is very, very cumulative. So it lets them see where they're at and not waste their time. I always point out that if you don't know the foundation and you go on to do something that depends on that foundation, you've really just wasted your time watching that video because you didn't get it and you're going to have to watch it again. So I think allowing them space to do that is really important. But also that group work, I can kind of keep an eye on students. So you can see if someone's not participating. Once again, I have a lot of undergrads that help. Not participating, I can reach out to them, that type of thing. I also do a lot of content check-in. So every lecture material content that's due, I said we use quick check questions. So I have a series of 5 to 10 questions. They can take them as many times as they want up until the due date. So and they just get their highest score. So the idea is not to penalize them, but it's an idea of, did you understand what you were looking at? Did you actually catch this in the video? Did you, hear common misunderstandings? Are you falling into that trap? But that is a very low stakes, and it's just done on percentage. You get like 90% of the points, you get all the points associated with it. And it allows them to touch base a lot to see where they're at with their learning. And then I do weekly quizzes, but I give them retake opportunities. So they take the quiz, we grade them. We don't release a key, but we release their grade on each question and a very general comment like math error or check K, something like that. That's not telling them what the answer is. And then 4 days later, they can retake the quiz. Now it's the same number of questions and type of questions, but because I have 20 different versions of every question, it's not the same exact question. So they're still showing that they went back, they learned it, and they can reapply it. And if they just take the first one, they get that score. If they do better on the retake, they get an average. And if they do worse on the retake, they just get their first score, because I don't want them to be afraid to try again. So that low stakes has really helped students. The reason I average it, I get asked why I average instead of just giving them the highest score. In the fall, I did just give them the highest score. And then what I saw were students not trying on the first one and using that second one as their main score, which not only gave them one chance, but also it put them behind in class, right? Because they were studying for that retake as if it were the first one. So now they're a week and a half behind material, and it just snowballed. So now we do an average, and students have really worked with that. And then the one nice thing, online systems make it really easy for accommodations like time and a half. Anything like that, I just set Canvas to do it for me. For accommodations like notes or needing captions on videos, we are lucky enough that if somebody has a captioning accommodation, IU has a group that will manually caption my videos, although I do use auto captioning at least for something, even though it's horrible for chemistry, I'll admit. And then also for notes, because I use that Docere program I mentioned earlier, the videos they're watching are me annotating their notes as well. So by the end of it, they would actually have a fully annotated copy of notes if needed. So they're not trying to coordinate with somebody during COVID to get a physical copy of their notes. But I think for me, the biggest aspect online has been like quick check-ins that are low stakes, but making sure, again, they all have a point, because otherwise students get overwhelmed about having something due every day. So really being mindful about how much we're asking them to do, but giving them those chances to learn and demonstrate that learning if they didn't get it the first time.
All right, thank you. So this next question is actually for both of you. Were you each given the latitude to determine and choose the materials that you wanted, or were they departmentally chosen? Start with Johnny.
Well, it depends on the course and then the lab. For our introductory courses, it's typically a committee decision. So we decide as a committee which textbook we're going to use, because that's the course that is really a foundational course, and we want all of our students to have the same basically framework. For upper level courses like genetics, for example, or microbiology, it's a individual instructor decision. So genetics, for example, we have 3 different textbooks that are used because we teach many different sections. Now for the lab, it's different. For the lab, it's typically also the coordinator who decides, he or she, which platforms, which manual they're going to use. So in our case, when we transitioned online, again, there was not enough resources, there was not enough budget. So we had to make decisions for the entire, university. We're gonna, get Joe, we're gonna get Labster, we're gonna get, this platform. So with that, in mind, then the TAs obviously would have to use whatever, coordinator has chosen. So it depends on the course, depends on the lab.
And for you, Megan, same question.
Yeah, our kind of intro courses tend to be decided, like, I don't know, we have a lot of instructor kind of autonomy in the course, but if we do teach multiple sections, it's kind of an agreed upon. You don't get one section with one textbook or one with the other, or one using online homework and one not. At our upper levels, it's fully our decision. Like I said, I decided to drop the textbook because that's what I wanted. Jove for us became an e-learning or an e-text through IU. So students had access to it. It was $30 for the semester. And for us, I don't have a textbook. And so that worked out with me and my students. But because it was done as an e-text, it allowed us to make an instructor decision as opposed to a department decision, whether or not we wanted to do it. Our labs, almost at every level, one person coordinates all the labs. And so it's really it's the faculty member's choice on how they do the labs. Whether we use a manual, we have obviously curriculum goals for the lab. So these techniques they need when they get out, but as far as which experiments they do, how they learn those techniques, it's really open. I think when we went online or to the hybrid, we really had to think about what techniques were important for students, not only to get through that course, but for the next course, because, post-COVID, I'm still going to have students coming into my upper level lab that took the prereq labs during COVID. So they didn't do all the techniques. They didn't do that. So it's going to be a long-term effect. But really think about what the key aspects are for that. And thankfully we were given we didn't have a choice in the mode of instruction as far as online or these rotations for our labs, but we did have a choice in what we did in them. Anything that involved money, obviously was more of a departmental decision since we all got our budget slashed this year. But as far as what experiments and that type of thing, it was our decision.
Thank you. So last question again for both of you. We'll kick it off with you first, Megan. What is your favorite in-class demonstration that you use to engage students?
Oh man. I love demos. I do demos all the time. My favorite. Yeah. So there are a couple I like for different reasons. I like elephant toothpaste because we cheat. And we use, 30% hydrogen peroxide, a very narrow tube. And I should say I really like that demo because it's a good example. I always like telling students how they can bring those demos home. So a lot of our students volunteer with kids or have younger siblings, and I'm all about getting kids interested in science. And so that one is one that you can adapt to home really well. So that's one of my favorite. I also really like I don't know if anyone's done this one, it's ethylene diamine with nickel, but as you replace waters on nickel with ethylene diamine, you get this super range of colors from green to bright purple. And for me, they take orgo first, right? So they're used to, if something changes color, you did it wrong. And for us in inorganic, it's like, if it doesn't change color, you did something wrong. And so it's really fun for me to watch their faces. And then the last one, my favorite, is white phosphorus. We light white phosphorus on fire and we let it ignite. And I enjoy showing them the connection. So I connect that one to history and how it's been used in the military and kind of what we use it for now. And we bring in some ethics on as far as whether or not it should be declared, a chemical warfare. And so it's kind of fun to bring in other aspects in that demo. So I enjoy that one as well. I love demos. Go ahead, Johnny.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I guess I anticipated this question because one of my favorite, I use markers. I call them biomarkers. So for those, I basically put together, markers with tape, and I can demonstrate almost everything in biology using these markers. So for example, I was office hours with a student and I just pulled them up and then talked about chromosomes lining up together and then separating. So this is a chromosome, this is a chromatid. We can do binary fission where, a cell elongates to double the size. Well, it has to be similar, I guess. Same color and then splits down the middle. We can do translation. So I think demos are important. And you can do that online. So I'm using and basically demonstrating what I'm doing. Now I can't do like Megan does with all the fumes and then color changes. Certainly I can't do it online, but I think you can do it with a camera and then with markers. And then I use also, it's amazing what you can get at the dollar store. I use dice from the dollar store to demonstrate probability. right? What's the probability of getting this number and that number? Well, you can get this number and that number, but then you can get another number and this number. So, right, you have two different permutations, and then you have to add them up. But I think, you know, biomarkers, in a lot of the classes, I have them demo, which is more important, right? Have them demo the stuff, do a video about it, and then post it on YouTube. And, you know, we had actually prizes where I would, do a panel of celebrity judges, the dean of the honors college, you know, the chair, and then there would be a vote to who, you know, wins the best video. And, you know, we have something at the end of class. Now, obviously, you know, I'm getting older, so I can't be as active as I used to be. But anyway, but demo is important, as Megan said. So thank you for that.
When you were both talking about this, I could just see the enthusiasm and zeal light up on both of your faces. I mean, it's a true testament why, you know, we're in the career that we're in. So unfortunately, though, that is all the time we do have today, everyone. So a special thank you to Johnny and Megan for taking time to be part of this discussion today. And a reminder to everyone that a recording of this session will be sent to you via email shortly. And we also have a librarian focus session coming up this Friday, February 19th, with Ellen Kimbrough, reference librarian at Meharry Medical College, and Megan Topes, STEM librarian, research and instruction services at the Pius Memorial Library at St. Louis University. Melanie Masrant, the library relations manager at Jove, will be talking with Ellen and Megan about the impact of the rise of hybrid environments on libraries and librarians. Please be sure to sign up for more insights and discussion. Thank you once again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.